He turned down every woman until an Apache widow asked, "You want a wife or just shelter?" Samuel had lived on the edge of the small frontier town for nearly 10 years. His cabin, built with his own hands, stood on a hill that overlooked the rolling plains. The walls were strong, made of thick logs that kept out the winter wind and summer heat alike. A small chimney puffed gentle smoke into the sky every morning and evening, and the cabin always smelled of fresh pine, wood polish, and the faint scent of smoke. To the townsfolk, Samuel was a mystery, a man who seemed part of the land itself, as steady and enduring as the hills around him. Every day for Samuel began before the sun had fully risen. He would light the small fire in his cabin and prepare a simple breakfast of beans, bread, and sometimes dried meat. Then he would step outside to check his traps or tend to the small garden he had cultivated over the years. Samuel lived a life of routine, where every action had its purpose, every day's work meant survival, and every moment was a quiet reflection of who he was. The townspeople often watched him from afar, curious about the man who never married, never socialized beyond necessity, and never allowed anyone to get too close. Samuel had not always been this way. There was a time in his youth when he had tried to imagine a life filled with companionship, laughter, and love. But life had other plans. A tragic loss had taught him that people could bring both joy and unbearable pain. Since then, he had chosen solitude, believing it was safer to rely only on himself. He had no illusions about life being easy, but he preferred hardship he could control to the uncertainties of the heart. He built his cabin, learned to hunt, fish, and live off the land, all to create a world where he was answerable to no one but himself. People often came to his cabin for work or advice. Samuel was known for his skill with wood and his knowledge of the land. He could repair roofs, fix broken fences, and build furniture that lasted for decades. Travelers sometimes stopped by to ask for directions or shelter, and Samuel rarely turned them away, as long as they respected his rules. Despite his willingness to help, he was not a man of many words. Most conversations ended quickly, leaving the visitor with the impression that Samuel was friendly but not interested in forming bonds. Women in the town had tried to catch his attention over the years. Some were persistent, visiting him under the guise of asking for help with chores or offering food. Others sent messages through neighbors, hinting at admiration or love. But Samuel had always turned them down politely, never harshly but firmly. He had a quiet dignity, and his refusals were never meant to hurt, only to protect the life he had built. The stories of these refusals traveled through the town, growing into a mix of curiosity, admiration, and sometimes mild frustration. Some wondered why such a strong, capable, and good-hearted man would choose to remain alone. Yet Samuel did not feel lonely. He had friends of a different kind, friends with 4 legs, feathers, or scales. His dog, a sturdy mutt named Bramble, was his loyal companion, never asking for much except food and the occasional scratch behind the ears. The birds often perched near his porch, singing their morning songs as if celebrating his presence. Even the foxes and deer of the nearby woods seemed to respect his territory, keeping a safe distance while he went about his work. To Samuel, these connections were enough, small reminders that life could be fulfilling without human complication. Samuel's life was not without challenges. Winters were harsh, bringing snowstorms that could trap him inside the cabin for days. Summer brought scorching heat, dry winds, and the occasional wildfire that forced him to work tirelessly to protect his home. He faced each challenge with quiet determination, never complaining, never seeking help unless absolutely necessary. It was this resilience that earned him the respect of the town. People admired the way he faced nature's difficulties with skill and courage. Children sometimes peeked at his cabin from a distance, imagining the life of a man who seemed almost part of the wilderness itself. Despite his solitary existence, Samuel was deeply observant of the world around him. He noticed the subtle changes in the seasons, the way the first frost would sparkle like diamonds in the morning, the way flowers slowly bloomed along the riverbank, or how the wind would shift direction before a storm. He understood the patterns of animals, the flow of water in the streams, and even the moods of the townspeople who passed through. This attentiveness made him wise, though he rarely shared his knowledge unless it was needed. His advice, when offered, was always practical, thoughtful, and often tinged with quiet humor that caught people off guard. Samuel had his moments of reflection, sitting by the fire with Bramble at his feet, staring into the flames as memories drifted through his mind. He thought of the people he had met, the towns he had passed through, and the experiences that shaped him. Occasionally, a pang of longing for human connection would appear, fleeting and easily dismissed. He remembered laughter, shared meals, and the comfort of someone who understood him. But these thoughts never lingered long. Samuel had learned that attachment could bring sorrow, and sorrow could be heavier than the burden of solitude. The town had its share of gossip about Samuel, as towns do. Some said he was waiting for the right woman, the one who could break through his walls. Others believed he had lost his heart to someone who no longer existed and that he could never love again. Yet Samuel paid little attention to these rumors. He had built his life around independence and self-reliance, and he had no desire to let anyone or anything change that. Even so, there was a quiet admiration among the townspeople. They respected a man who knew himself, who had chosen a path different from theirs, and who faced life with unwavering courage. Samuel's days were filled with simple pleasures. He would rise early, feed Bramble, check his traps, and gather food for the day. He spent hours carving wood, making furniture, and repairing tools. Sometimes he wandered into the nearby forest, walking quietly, listening to the rustling leaves and distant calls of birds. These moments of solitude were precious, giving him a sense of peace that few could understand. At night, he would sit by his fireplace, the cabin warm, the stars bright overhead, and he would read from a small collection of books he had gathered over the years. History, philosophy, and tales of adventure kept his mind sharp and his spirit engaged. Though he had rejected the company of many women, Samuel was not unkind. He helped neighbors in need, shared food with those less fortunate, and offered guidance to anyone who sought it sincerely. His generosity was quiet, without fanfare, and often unnoticed by most. Yet those who received his help remembered him, speaking of his integrity and strength. It was this combination of skill, kindness, and mystery that made Samuel an enduring figure in the town, a man of principle who lived life on his own terms. As the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the plains, Samuel would often pause to watch the world around him. The colors of the sky shifted from gold to pink to deep purple, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in the life he had created. Though alone, he was not lonely. Though challenged by nature and circumstance, he was never defeated. Samuel had found a balance, a rhythm, and a purpose that suited him perfectly. In his solitude, he had discovered freedom, and in freedom, he had found contentment. Every villager who saw him passing by his cabin could sense the quiet power of his presence. A man who had chosen to live by his own rules, who faced the elements, who endured hardship, and who still managed to maintain dignity and humanity. Samuel's life was simple in its essentials, but rich in meaning. And though he had turned down many paths that others might have taken, he had built a life uniquely his own. A life where work, nature, and quiet reflection created a harmony that no words or relationships could easily disrupt. It was in this world of routine, reflection, and quiet dignity that Samuel continued his days. Little did he know that the arrival of someone entirely different, a woman with strength, grief, and courage, would challenge everything he had built. Until that day, Samuel remained the man who turned down every woman, a man whose life was his own, whose heart was cautious, and whose solitude had become both shield and companion. The winds had begun to shift, carrying the crisp scent of early autumn through the hills around Samuel's cabin. The leaves were turning gold and red, falling slowly to the ground in small whirlwinds. It was a quiet, reflective season, one that Samuel usually welcomed with open arms. But that morning, the calm he had grown used to seem different. He noticed footprints in the soft soil leading up the hill, footprints that were not his own. They were careful, deliberate, and human. Samuel paused, squinting into the distance. Bramble growled softly, sensing the presence of someone unfamiliar. By mid-morning, a figure appeared through the thinning fog. She was a woman, her clothing practical but worn, and her eyes sharp and wary. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved, a measured confidence that immediately drew Samuel's attention. She carried a small bundle of belongings, wrapped in cloth, and walked steadily toward the cabin. Samuel instinctively reached for his rifle, a habit he had developed over years of solitude and caution. But he didn't raise it immediately, curious about the presence of this stranger. The woman stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes meeting Samuel's. There was no hesitation, no fear. "I need shelter," she said clearly, her voice steady, yet carrying the weight of loss. "I've come from the south. I have nowhere else to go." Samuel studied her carefully. She looked strong, but there was a hint of vulnerability in the way she carried herself. He could see that she had faced hardship, perhaps more than most people in the town had ever known. "I don't usually take in strangers," Samuel said cautiously. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of warning in it. "Why should I make an exception for you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if assessing him. Then she smiled faintly, a small, confident smile that seemed almost mischievous. "Because I am not asking for charity," she said. "I am asking for honesty. Tell me, do you want a wife or just shelter?" Samuel froze. The question was unexpected, direct, and unlike anything anyone had ever asked him before. Most women had tried charm, flattery, or subtle persuasion. She had asked a question that cut straight to the point, revealing her own strength and her unwillingness to be treated as weak or dependent. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, uncertain how to respond. He had spent years avoiding questions like this, avoiding situations where emotions could complicate his careful, solitary life. Yet there was something about her, not arrogance but clarity. She knew what she wanted and had no intention of wasting time on pretense. He studied her eyes, dark and steady, and for the first time in many years he did not have an answer ready. "Shelter is not a promise," he finally said, his voice measured. "If you come in, you must follow my rules. You must work, you must respect my space, and you must accept the way things are here." The woman nodded, as if expecting such terms. "I am not here to cause trouble," she said simply. "I can work, I can survive. I only ask for a place where I can live without being in danger." Samuel considered her words. He had helped travelers before, but few had come with such quiet confidence, without fear, and without asking for pity. He could see she was capable, resourceful, and perhaps, in time, someone he might respect deeply. With a slight gesture, Samuel motioned for her to follow. She moved easily into the cabin clearing, Bramble sniffing at her cautiously before settling down. Samuel watched as she set down her bundle and began to arrange it neatly, showing attention to detail and a practical sense that impressed him silently. Her hands were strong and steady, and even in the small tasks she undertook, there was a sense of purpose and discipline. Days passed, and life at the cabin began to change in subtle ways. Samuel observed the woman, who introduced herself as Lela, as she settled into the routines of survival. She hunted small game alongside him, prepared meals over the fire, and repaired the small tools and equipment that Samuel used daily. She asked questions when necessary, but never intruded unnecessarily into his space. Samuel noticed her watching the forest closely, tracking birds and animals with an experienced eye. She had clearly lived through hardship, and her skills were not just practical but instinctive. Evenings were the most striking. Samuel and Lela would sit by the fire after their work was done, the quiet crackling of flames filling the cabin. At first, conversation was minimal. Lela asked practical questions about the land, the traps, or the best places to gather wood. Samuel answered with measured words, sometimes offering small insights about the patterns of the forest or the habits of animals. But slowly the conversation began to stretch further, stories of the places they had been, memories of people they had known, and the lessons life had taught them. Lela spoke of her late husband, of the challenges she had faced as an Apache widow, and the ways she had survived alone. Samuel, in turn, shared fragments of his past, carefully chosen to avoid revealing too much vulnerability. What surprised Samuel most was the sense of humor Lela carried within her. Even in discussing serious matters, she could find a quiet irony in the world, a lightness that made the long, hard days feel more bearable. She challenged him at times, teasing his habits, questioning his assumptions, and making him think in ways he had long avoided. Samuel found himself listening more intently than he had ever listened to anyone, his mind alert to her insights, his heart slowly opening in ways he did not fully understand. The villagers began to notice the new presence at Samuel's cabin. Whispers spread through the town, as people speculated about the relationship between the solitary man and the strong, mysterious woman who had arrived seemingly out of nowhere. Some admired Lela's courage, while others questioned why Samuel, who had always avoided women, had let her stay. Samuel paid little attention to the gossip. He was focused on the practicalities of life, ensuring food, maintaining the cabin, and understanding the capabilities of this woman who had entered his world so boldly. Winter approached, and with it came the first challenges that tested their fragile partnership. Snow fell heavily, covering the trails and making hunting more difficult. The temperature dropped to bitter lows, and the nights seemed longer and darker than ever before. Lela, however, proved herself to be resilient and adaptable. She learned quickly how to prepare the cabin for cold nights, gather firewood efficiently, and store food to last through the blizzards. Samuel observed her with a growing respect, noting how her strength was not just physical, but mental and emotional as well. She remained calm and focused, even when the wind howled outside and the cold seeped through the thick walls of the cabin. The first real test came when a sudden snowstorm trapped them inside for 3 days. They had limited food, and the cold was relentless. Samuel expected tension, frustration, or fear to arise, but instead, he found cooperation and ingenuity. Lela suggested rearranging supplies, using extra blankets for insulation, and creating a system to ration their food without waste. Samuel followed her lead, impressed by her clear thinking under pressure. During those long days, a bond began to form, one based not on romance, but on trust and mutual reliance. They saw each other as equals, as capable partners navigating the challenges of a harsh world together. By the time the storm passed, Samuel realized that Lela's presence had shifted something deep within him. He was not the same man who had turned down every woman. Her strength, courage, and clarity had challenged his long-held belief that solitude was the only safe path. He began to understand that connection, carefully chosen and mutually respectful, did not have to bring sorrow. It could bring resilience and companionship. Yet Samuel was cautious. He had spent years building walls around his heart, and he was not ready to tear them down completely. Lela sensed this, but she did not push. She understood patience and respected his boundaries. Her approach was quiet but firm, showing that she could be trusted, and that her presence was not a threat to his carefully ordered life. Over time, Samuel found himself seeking her opinion, noticing her absence, and valuing her company more than he expected. Outside the cabin, the world continued its rhythm. The plains turned white with snow, the river froze over, and the wind carved patterns into the landscape. Within the cabin, the fire burned steadily, providing warmth and a sense of safety. Samuel and Lela worked together, shared meals, and spoke quietly during the long winter nights. Their partnership was practical, rooted in survival, yet layered with subtle recognition of each other's strengths and character. It was a companionship Samuel had never anticipated, yet one he quietly appreciated. By the end of winter, it was clear to both Samuel and Lela that their lives had become intertwined in ways neither could ignore. They had faced challenges together, learned from each other, and discovered a rhythm that balanced solitude with cooperation. Samuel still maintained his independence, but now he had someone to share the burdens and the small joys of life. He had turned down every woman before, yet here was someone who had entered his world boldly, honestly, and without pretense. For the first time in years, he began to consider the possibility that his life could be richer, not despite another person, but because of them. The arrival of spring brought new life to the land surrounding Samuel's cabin. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of green grass and wildflowers. The river ran clear and cold, rushing over rocks with a fresh, joyful sound. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. It was a season of renewal, yet for Samuel, this year, spring felt different. The quiet rhythm of his life had changed in subtle ways, though he hadn't yet allowed himself to fully admit it. Lela had settled into the cabin seamlessly. She had learned the routines, mastered the skills required for survival, and yet she brought something more, an energy that Samuel could not ignore. She moved through the cabin with purpose, gathering firewood, repairing the fence, and tending to a small garden that she had planted beside the cabin. Unlike other women who had tried to charm him with flattery, Lela did not seek approval. She simply acted, and Samuel found himself admiring the strength and clarity she brought into his life. Their mornings became a shared ritual. Samuel would rise early, feed Bramble, and check traps, while Lela prepared breakfast and organized supplies. Sometimes she would accompany him into the forest, helping him track deer or set snares. At first, Samuel kept his distance emotionally, focusing only on practical matters. Yet he noticed the way Lella worked, her attention to detail, and the quiet way she respected the land. He realized that her presence did not disrupt his life. It enhanced it. Her skills, her patience, and her resilience allowed him to accomplish more, and he found himself appreciating her insight more than he had anticipated. During their work in the forest, Samuel began to notice small habits that revealed more about Lella's character. She observed animals with remarkable patience, understanding their movements and behavior without disturbing them. She spoke softly to Bramble, earning the dog's trust almost immediately. She carried herself with dignity, even when tired or hungry, and her laughter, rare but genuine, brought warmth to the otherwise quiet cabin. Samuel, who had long avoided emotional connections, felt a strange sense of peace in her presence. He was not used to companionship that did not demand or criticize, but simply existed alongside him, equally grounded and equally strong. Their evenings became a time of conversation. By the fire, Samuel would carve pieces of wood or repair tools, while Lella would spin wool, mend clothing, or simply sit and watch the flames. At first, their talks were practical, discussing food, weather, or plans for the day. But gradually, the topics expanded. Lella spoke of her life before arriving at the cabin, sharing stories of her husband, her tribe, and the challenges she had faced as a widow. Her words carried both sorrow and resilience, painting a picture of a life shaped by loss but not defined by it. Samuel listened, fascinated by her honesty and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel finally spoke about his past. He did not reveal everything, he was cautious, but he shared fragments, the friends he had lost, the choices that had led him to solitude, and the sorrow that had made him wary of attachment. Lella listened without interruption, her eyes steady and understanding. She did not offer easy solutions or judgments. She simply acknowledged his experiences, allowing him to speak without fear of ridicule or rejection. This simple act of listening, Samuel realized, was more powerful than any advice or persuasion. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. As weeks turned into months, a subtle bond developed between them. It was not yet romance, not yet love, but a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and shared responsibility. They faced challenges together, from repairing the roof after a spring storm to protecting the cabin from wild animals. Each difficulty they overcame strengthened their connection, proving that they could rely on each other when circumstances demanded it. Samuel found himself thinking about Lella more often, noticing her absence when she went into the forest alone, or wondering if she was cold during the night. These thoughts surprised him, for he had long believed that emotional attachments were dangerous and unnecessary. Lella, too, began to see Samuel differently. She recognized his strength, his discipline, and the quiet wisdom that guided his actions. But she also noticed moments of vulnerability, the way he hesitated before sharing certain memories, or the rare times when he allowed a small smile or sigh to escape. She understood that these glimpses of emotion were carefully guarded, yet they were real, and she respected them. Lella did not push. She allowed the bond to grow naturally, understanding that trust and intimacy could not be forced. One day, while gathering water from the river, they encountered a challenge that tested their partnership in a new way. The river had swollen after heavy rain, making the usual crossing dangerous. Samuel calculated the risks, scanning the rushing water and the slippery rocks. Lella observed silently, then suggested a safer path that Samuel had overlooked. He followed her lead, and together they navigated the crossing without incident. Samuel was struck by her practical wisdom and calm demeanor. She had earned his trust not through words, but through action, and he realized that her presence had become indispensable. Their growing closeness was also reflected in small, everyday gestures. Lella would prepare food with extra care, knowing what Samuel liked. He, in turn, would take the time to repair a broken tool or carve a small item for her, acts that had previously felt unnecessary when he lived alone. They learned each other's rhythms, the times of day they worked best, the ways they responded to stress, and the moments when silence was more comforting than conversation. In these small ways, their lives became intertwined, each action a thread in a slowly forming tapestry of shared existence. Despite this growing connection, Samuel remained cautious. His past experiences had taught him that vulnerability could be dangerous. He still kept his emotions carefully guarded, testing Lella's patience and understanding. At times, he would withdraw, focusing on work or the land, avoiding direct conversation about feelings. Lella noticed these moments but did not press. She respected his boundaries, knowing that patience and consistency were more powerful than pressure or persuasion. Her calm presence allowed Samuel to explore his feelings at his own pace, without fear of judgment or rejection. As summer approached, new opportunities and challenges arose. The garden they had planted together flourished, providing fresh vegetables and herbs. Samuel began to teach Lella advanced carpentry skills, while she shared techniques for preserving food and making herbal remedies. Their collaboration was seamless, each learning from the other while contributing their own strengths. This mutual exchange reinforced their bond, showing that partnership was not about dominance or submission, but about respect, skill, and shared responsibility. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Samuel and Lella sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers. Samuel spoke quietly, reflecting on the changes he had noticed in himself since Lella's arrival. He admitted, without fully realizing the depth of his feelings, that her presence had brought a sense of calm, purpose, and even joy that he had not known he was missing. Lella listened, smiling softly, understanding that his words were significant even if he could not fully express them. The townspeople continued to speculate about Samuel and Lella, but the cabin on the hill remained a place of quiet partnership rather than public spectacle. Occasionally, travelers would pass by, curious about the unusual duo, but Samuel and Lella paid little attention. Their focus was on survival, cooperation, and the slow, deliberate building of trust. They faced the world together, each learning to navigate the challenges of life while appreciating the strengths the other brought. Over time, Samuel realized that his perspective on relationships was changing. He no longer saw emotional connection as a weakness. Instead, he recognized it as a form of strength, a bond that could provide support, insight, and resilience. Lella had taught him, through action and presence, that companionship could coexist with independence, that vulnerability could coexist with strength. This realization was subtle but profound, reshaping the way he viewed his own life and the possibilities it held. By the end of the season, Samuel and Lella had established a rhythm that was both familiar and comforting. They worked, rested, and shared the small joys of life together, each contributing to a partnership built on respect, trust, and mutual admiration. While they had not spoken of love explicitly, it was present in the quiet gestures, the shared labor, and the understanding that had grown between them. Samuel, once a man who had turned down every woman, now found himself considering a future where companionship was not a threat, but a source of strength and fulfillment. As summer unfolded, the land around them came alive with color and movement. Flowers bloomed, animals thrived, and the river sparkled under the sun. Samuel and Lella continued their work, side by side, learning from each other, supporting each other, and discovering the subtle joys of partnership. Each day reinforced the lessons of trust, patience, and resilience. And though challenges remained, Samuel knew that together, they could face whatever came, stronger as a pair than he had ever been alone. The first hints of autumn returned, bringing with them cooler mornings and evenings filled with the scent of fallen leaves. The cabin stood quietly on the hill, surrounded by golden fields and the forest that stretched into the distance. Samuel and Lella had settled into a rhythm over the past months, sharing responsibilities, work, and quiet companionship. Their bond had grown deeper, though unspoken. They relied on each other, trusted each other, and without realizing it fully, had begun to build a life together. Yet, neither had voiced the words that lingered in the air, words about love, about the future, about what it meant to be more than just partners surviving together. One crisp morning, Samuel noticed something unusual while inspecting the traps near the river. A small group of strangers had entered the area, unaware of his presence. They were travelers at first glance, but Samuel's instincts told him they might pose a threat. He returned quickly to the cabin and alerted Lella. Bramble growled, sensing the tension, and Samuel felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. It had been years since he had faced such a danger, but now he was not alone. Lella's presence was steadying, a silent reassurance that they would face this challenge together. The strangers approached cautiously, explaining that they had become lost and were in need of assistance. Samuel, wary but practical, offered food and directions, keeping his guard up. Lela observed quietly, noting every movement, every word. She understood that danger could take many forms, not only through violence but also through deceit. She suggested practical ways to help without compromising their safety, earning Samuel's quiet respect once again. The encounter ended without incident, but it served as a reminder of the unpredictable world outside their cabin. Both Samuel and Lela realized that their partnership was not just emotional but essential for survival in the face of uncertainty. Days passed, and life returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet, Samuel felt a shift within himself. The challenges they faced together had revealed something he had long kept buried: an ability to care deeply for someone without fear, to trust, to rely on another person. He found himself noticing Lela more acutely. The way her eyes sparkled when she discovered something new, the determination in her hands as she worked, and the subtle warmth in her voice that had become a comforting presence. It was in these small, ordinary moments that Samuel began to understand the depth of his feelings. Lela, too, sensed a change. She noticed Samuel's protective instincts, the quiet way he watched over her, and the subtle gestures that revealed his growing attachment. She did not rush him with words, but allowed their bond to deepen naturally. Her patience, understanding, and respect for his independence were unwavering. She continued to demonstrate strength and resilience, not to impress him, but to live fully in the moment and contribute equally to their shared life. Their connection was evolving, moving beyond mere survival into something more profound, a partnership of hearts and minds, grounded in trust and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a sudden fire broke out in the nearby forest. The dry grass and fallen leaves fueled the flames, and the wind carried sparks dangerously close to their cabin. Samuel reacted immediately, barking orders to Lela and Bramble. Lela did not hesitate. She grabbed buckets of water from the river, helped Samuel create a fire break, and assisted in clearing debris. The fire was relentless, testing their stamina, patience, and courage. Yet together they worked seamlessly, each anticipating the other's moves, each offering strength when the other faltered. Hours passed, and by the time the last flames were extinguished, the cabin and their surrounding land were safe, though the exhaustion in their bodies was profound. Samuel looked at Lela, covered in soot and sweat, and felt an overwhelming surge of admiration and gratitude. In that moment, he realized that his life had changed in ways he had never anticipated. Lela was no longer just a companion. She was an equal partner, someone he could rely on completely, someone who had become indispensable. He saw clearly that the walls he had built around his heart for so many years were beginning to crumble, and he did not resist. That night, by the warmth of the fire, Samuel spoke in a voice quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "I've spent so many years thinking I could only rely on myself," he began. Lela listened intently, sensing the weight behind his words. "I never imagined someone could come into my life and change that. You've changed it and me." There was a pause, heavy with emotion, as Samuel searched for the right words. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it, not just as someone I live with, but as someone I care for." Lela's eyes softened, a gentle smile spreading across her face. She reached for his hand, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than words ever could. "I've felt the same," she said quietly. "I never expected this either, but I know that whatever comes, we face it together." The fire crackled, the night was still, and in that moment the unspoken bond between them became clear. They had survived storms, isolation, and danger, not only because of their individual strengths, but because of the trust and support they offered each other. Love had grown quietly, naturally, like a river carving its way through the land. The following weeks were a time of joy and adjustment. Samuel and Lela worked together to repair damage from the fire, strengthen the cabin, and prepare for the coming winter. Yet now, their work was accompanied by laughter, shared stories, and quiet moments of tenderness. They began to explore the world beyond the cabin together, venturing into nearby hills, observing wildlife, and enjoying the beauty of the land in a way they had not before. Each day strengthened their connection, transforming routine survival into a life rich with shared experience. Samuel noticed how much he had changed. The careful solitude he had cherished for so many years was no longer a shield, but a part of a life that included someone else. Lela's presence had taught him patience, trust, and the quiet power of companionship. He felt lighter, more open, and more complete. The lessons he had learned from life's hardships, resilience, independence, and determination, remained, but they were now balanced with love, empathy, and shared strength. Lela, too, felt a sense of fulfillment she had not experienced before. Though she had been a widow and had faced loss, she had found not only survival but a true partnership. Samuel had shown her a world of stability, quiet strength, and respect, while she had brought courage, warmth, and companionship into his life. Together, they discovered that two individuals, each strong in their own right, could create a life richer and more meaningful than either could have alone. As the first snow of the new winter approached, Samuel and Lela prepared the cabin with care. They stocked food, strengthened the chimney, and ensured that Bramble would be comfortable during the cold nights. The work was demanding, yet it was no longer solitary labor. They shared each task, communicated seamlessly, and supported each other through fatigue and frustration. The cabin, once a symbol of Samuel's solitary life, had become a home, a place of safety, warmth, and shared purpose. One quiet evening, Samuel and Lela sat outside the cabin, watching the stars appear in the clear night sky. The air was crisp, and the world seemed still, as if holding its breath. Samuel turned to Lela, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin and the steady strength in her grip. "I used to think life was safer alone," he said softly. "But now I see, the right person can make you stronger, braver, and even happier." Lela smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And I've learned that trust and patience can bring more joy than fear ever could," she replied. They sat together in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath them, and appreciating the simple yet profound truth of their shared life. The trials they had faced, the harsh winters, the fires, the dangers of the wild, and the challenges of human connection, had all led them to this moment. They had discovered not only survival but fulfillment, not only partnership but love, quietly grown and deeply felt. As the months passed, Samuel and Lela continued to build their life together. The cabin became a place of warmth and laughter, a haven for Bramble, and a symbol of the life they had created. They faced challenges with patience and cooperation, celebrated successes with quiet joy, and supported each other through difficulties without complaint. Their bond, tested by time and circumstance, had become unshakable. Samuel no longer feared connection, and Lela had found the home and partnership she had long sought. Eventually, the town came to accept the change in Samuel. He was no longer the solitary man who turned down every woman. He was now part of a partnership admired by many, a man who had learned that love was not weakness but strength. Lela became a respected figure as well, known for her courage, skill, and quiet wisdom. Together, they demonstrated that life could be challenging yet deeply rewarding when shared with someone who understood, respected, and complimented you. In the end, Samuel and Lela's story was one of transformation, trust, and quiet triumph. From two individuals shaped by hardship, solitude, and loss, they had built a life together filled with purpose, resilience, and love. Their cabin on the hill stood as a testament to their journey, a place where the wilderness and human connection intertwined, where challenges were faced together, and where the heart found courage to embrace not only survival but happiness. They had discovered that sometimes, the right person could turn a solitary life into one of profound meaning and joy.